Arthur was convinced that he had won the lottery of life. They had got the most amazing girl on the planet, fiery red hair, piercing green eyes. She was simply dizzy. Tall, with a figure that could stop movement, and legs that seemed to drag on forever. Of course, there was no shortage of fans, but Angela loved the good life. That's why she happily accepted Arthur's attention. At the age of 32, he had everything he needed. 2 higher educations, a thriving law practice, first-class real estate in the city centre, and a car that testified to success. Angela, on the other hand, worked as a model, gracing commercials and posing for fashion spreads, flaunting the latest trends. Arthur's father, a big name in legal circles, wasn't exactly thrilled with his son's choice. He was firmly of the belief that models were just stress relief girls, nothing more. But Arthur, determined and passionate, managed to convince him to give his blessing, albeit with the hope that Angela would soon hang up her modelling career, settle down, and start a family, preferably producing grandchildren to pamper. Of course, reality had other plans. Angela loved living in the fast lane. She had everything she could wish for: lavish vacations, a high-end car, fur coats, jewellery, the works. Arthur covered all their expenses, so there was no need for her to keep working. But she didn't give up her modelling gigs. In fact, she kept posing for magazines and even travelled for shoots whenever the contracts demanded it. One day, Arthur had to travel to another city for a meeting with some government officials regarding one of his clients. After the business part was done, the group moved to the coffee table, waiting for cognac and coffee the secretary had ordered. Arthur's eyes landed on the cover of a magazine, which featured a photo of his wife in a swimsuit. He couldn't tear his gaze away from her captivating beauty, so he casually asked, "Excuse me, but are you also into her?" He reached for the magazine. "Oh, she's a great girl," one of the men in uniform smirked. "No one here can resist her. We appreciate beauty. What can you do? Just warn us next time, and everything will be fine." Arthur was so stunned by what he heard that he froze. "Don't be shy, buddy," the man continued smirking. "Go ahead. Make it happen. You can relax too, you know." Arthur's mind was reeling. It's her, he thought. It's Angela. But they'd been married for 4 years. How could he have missed something like this? As the group debated where to go next, Arthur found himself lost in thought, the words of his colleague echoing in his head. He excused himself, and once alone in his hotel room, he couldn't sleep a wink. He hoped against hope that it was all a mistake. Maybe it wasn't his wife in that magazine, or maybe his colleagues had confused her with someone else. But deep down, Arthur knew he had to face the truth. He'd need to go home as though nothing had happened, even though the unsettling conversation weighed on him. Angela greeted him as usual, but something felt off. Trying to mask his discomfort with a story about being run down and catching a cold, he moved to the couch in the living room. What surprised him, however, was how little she seemed to care about his condition. It was almost like she was perfectly fine with it all. Not even 3 days later, Arthur was on the phone with a client in another city. "Listen, I've got a situation," Arthur said. "I'm planning a little surprise for a friend at his bachelor party. Can you help me out with some girls? I'm thinking of someone like Black from the magazine, but can you make sure they leave out any inappropriate elements? After that, I'll handle the personal meetings to seal the deal. I'll cover all the costs, don't worry." He paused. "Do you think they'll be offended?" The question lingered in the air, but Arthur already had a sinking feeling that he might be walking into a much darker reality than he'd ever imagined. Arthur had no intention of following through with his bachelor party bluff, but the idea of seeing even just a glimpse of what his wife was really up to, it gnawed at him. At least it wouldn't hurt to have that video on a flash drive, right? The conversation with his acquaintance took him by surprise. "By the way," the man said, "Leica doesn't even take money for it. She says she's totally set, but just craves a little excitement in life. And boy, she knows how to work the crowd." The revelation hit Arthur hard. Excitement. He was losing his grip on reality. Over his morning coffee, Angela casually mentioned that she'd signed a new contract for a shoot and would be leaving on a short business trip soon. She was gone for just 2 days, but before she even returned, Arthur had a video on his computer of a lap dance and other antics put on by models. For the longest time, Arthur had thought those seductive dances were just for him. Angela's performances were so convincing that the thought of her performing for anyone else never even crossed his mind. But the footage he watched was far more explicit than anything he'd imagined. Arthur couldn't wrap his head around it. How had things gotten so out of hand? How had he let Angela convince him that modeling was harmless, that it wasn't something that could jeopardize their relationship? He was aware from conversations with friends in other cities that her dancing wasn't the only thing she offered. She had no qualms about pushing boundaries, and not just in private. His suspicions now grew into full-blown doubts. "Angela," he started one day, trying to sound casual, "I was thinking of doing something a little different for Lawyer's Day. How about we arrange for a few girls to shoot an adult video? I'll take care of everything, guaranteed pay it." Angela turned on him in an instant. "Are you out of your mind? We're models, not call girls willing to sell ourselves for money." Arthur feigned nonchalance. All right, no need to get worked up. Let's forget about the money then." "No," she snapped. "It's not happening. Don't even think about it. You sound just like your father. What makes you think we're all just about that?" Arthur tried to smooth it over. Okay, calm down. I get it." He kissed her forehead and, trying to keep his thoughts in check, changed the subject. The last thing he wanted was to give himself away, but inside, his stomach churned. He couldn't live with a woman who treated her beauty like a commodity for everyone else. The plan was now clear. Arthur would gather the evidence himself. He called up a friend under the pretense of wanting to unwind and arranged a meeting. "Good to know we can trust each other," Angela said, seeing him off. She almost seemed to know something was up. The night promised to be a wild one. Arthur was nervous, not just because of the company, but because he knew the stakes. The night included a yacht, a fancy restaurant, billiards, and a sauna. Arthur wasn't accustomed to these types of events, but he was about to dive in headfirst, alcohol in hand. Even though the sauna wasn't exactly a great pairing with booze, he figured he could manage. As the group gathered at the entrance, Arthur's heart raced in his chest. He didn't know if it was the alcohol or the situation, but everything felt surreal. He ducked into the steam room, trying to steady himself. When he finally emerged, the girls were already in the pool, champagne splashing everywhere, but there was no sign of Angela. For a brief moment, relief washed over him. It's a mistake, he thought. She's at home. But just as quickly, his thoughts were interrupted by a voice. "Leica will be free soon," one of the guys shouted. "You can go and get something to drink." Arthur barely registered the words as he made his way to the break room. The door swung open, and there she was, Angela, flushed, her hair damp, a blush colouring her cheeks. "Well, ready to have some fun," she purred. Arthur's pulse spiked as he adjusted the towel around his waist. "What are you doing here?" He demanded, barely able to contain his disbelief. "Is this how you stay true to your principles and values?" "I never thought you would do this," he muttered, but Angela cut him off. "And you, Arthur, have never thought this through. You've never had enough excitement in your life, but now you're going to get plenty. And trust me, it's not just about getting pleasure anymore. It's about charging for it. My connections are cutting off." Without saying another word, Arthur turned and left his wife alone. His head was spinning as he tried to make sense of everything. He was a lawyer, a man who prided himself on his sharp mind and quick thinking, but at that moment he couldn't find a single excuse for what had just happened in front of him. The divorce was instantaneous, and his ex-wife's life was no longer of interest.